In a laboratory at Yale University, an ordinary man sat in front of a machine with 30 switches. The labels climbed from a mild shock to danger, severe shock, and finally 450 volts. In the next room, another man answered memory questions. Every time he got one wrong, the volunteer at the machine was told to give him a stronger electric shock. At first, the learner complained. Then he screamed. Then he stopped answering. And when the volunteer turned around, distressed and uncertain, a man in a gray lab coat calmly told him, "The experiment requires that you continue. This is the experiment where people shocked a stranger because they were told to. The shocks were not real. The pain in the other room was acted. But the person pressing the switches did not know that. He believed the machine worked. He believed the screams. And the question Stanley Milgram wanted to answer was how far an ordinary person would go when responsibility seemed to belong to an authority. Milgram designed the study in the shadow of the Second World War and the trial of Adolf Eichmann. People wanted to believe that obedient cruelty belonged to a certain kind of person in a certain kind of place. Milgram asked a colder question. Could the pressure to obey be built inside a clean American laboratory? Volunteers answered an advertisement for a study of memory and learning. When they arrived, they met another supposed participant. A draw appeared to assign roles. One would be the teacher, one the learner. But the draw was fixed. The real participant always became the teacher. The learner was an actor working with the experiment. The learner was strapped into a chair in another room. The participant saw electrode paste and straps. He was even given a small sample shock, enough to make the machine feel real. Then he took his seat in front of the generator. Each mistake meant moving one switch higher. 15 volts. 30. 45. At the lower levels, the task could feel uncomfortable but manageable. The experimenter was nearby. The learner had agreed to participate. A person could tell himself he was only following the procedure for one more question. That is one of the mechanisms hiding inside obedience. The terrible decision rarely arrives all at once. It arrives as the next small step after a step you have already taken. At a certain point, the learner began to protest. He complained of pain. He demanded to be released. As the supposed voltage rose, his responses became more urgent. Eventually, he refused to answer at all. The participant could hear him. Some participants laughed nervously. Some sweated, trembled, or begged the experimenter to stop. They were not enjoying the situation. Many clearly understood that something might be wrong. But understanding harm and refusing authority are not the same action. When a participant hesitated, the experimenter used a sequence of prompts. He did not shout. He did not threaten violence. He used calm institutional language. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice, you must go on. A lab coat, a prestigious university, a measured voice, a machine marked with official-looking labels. Nothing there removed the participant's ability to stand up. But everything there made standing up feel like the abnormal choice. In Milgram's published study, before the experiment was run, people expected almost nobody would go all the way. Yet, in the reported condition, 26 of 40 participants continued to the highest switch, 450 volts. 65%. That number is remembered because it feels like an accusation. But it should be handled carefully. It does not mean 65% of all people will always obey any order. It does not mean the volunteers were secretly eager to hurt someone. The conditions mattered. The location, the closeness of authority, the gradual escalation, the belief that a scientific purpose existed. That is precisely why the study is disturbing. It did not need monsters. It built a situation in which decent people felt trapped between another person's suffering and an authority's expectation. There was another detail that made the trap tighter. The participant was not allowed to treat silence as an escape from the task. If the learner failed to answer after protesting, the procedure instructed the teacher to count no answer as a wrong answer and continue upward. Silence, which any ordinary person might hear as a warning to stop, was turned by the rules into a reason to press the next switch. The machine gave moral confusion a tidy shape. One row of labels, one mistake, one higher voltage. A person did not have to decide whether to harm a stranger in the abstract. He only had to decide whether to disrupt a legitimate-looking procedure now. The study also created suffering on the participants' side. People believed they might be seriously harming another human being. That distress is a major reason experiments like Milgram's face severe ethical criticism. Knowledge was gathered by placing people inside a moral emergency without honestly telling them what was happening. Later variations showed how much circumstances could matter. When the learner was closer, obedience could decline. When other people refused first, refusal became easier. When the authority was less immediate or the setting felt less legitimate, the spell weakened. That is not comforting. It means courage can depend on whether someone else gives us permission to see resistance as normal. There is a reason this detail matters outside a laboratory. Institutions rarely ask people to think of themselves as cruel. They divide choices into procedures, steps, and responsibilities. Someone writes the rule. Someone delivers the instruction. Someone else presses the button. By distributing responsibility, a system can make every individual feel as if the decisive act belongs somewhere else. Milgram's participants were confronted with that illusion in a few minutes. The rest of us encounter quieter versions of it whenever a rule appears official enough that objecting feels embarrassing, disloyal, or professionally dangerous. Look again at the participant in front of the machine. He does not begin at 450 volts. He begins at 15. He does not hear silence at first. He hears ordinary wrong answers. He does not receive an order that sounds cruel. He receives a request to continue a study he agreed to join. One switch becomes another. One justification becomes another. By the time the situation clearly feels wrong, stopping means admitting the earlier choices may already have been wrong too. That is a difficult admission when an expert beside you keeps saying the responsibility is his. But the hand on the switch is still yours. The lasting question of Milgram's experiment is not whether you are good or bad. Most people answer that too quickly. The question is what you would do in the small moment before the crisis looked like a crisis. Would you challenge the first uncomfortable instruction? Would you wait for a scream? Would you need someone beside you to refuse first? Or would a calm voice in a lab coat make the next switch feel like someone else's decision? The learner was not truly being shocked. The obedience was real. Tell me honestly in the comments. Which switch would have been your last one? Subscribe to the experiment files for another true experiment where ordinary people are given an impossible rule and asked to accept it. And if this story made the switch feel closer than you expected, share it with someone who thinks they would always refuse. The next file begins with fear, because the most dangerous order is often the one that sounds procedural, polite, and almost finished.